Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Aging with Attitude on Channel 21, serving the greater Charlotte metro market. My name is Phil Koch. I'll be your host this evening. And tonight we have Dan Starks, who is Starks Training Institute Incorporated president and founder, correct? Also a firearm instructor and has done a host of things with regards to firearms and public safety. Welcome.
Thank you. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be here. I've kind of made it a career of teaching people how to protect themselves. Yeah. Started out a long time ago, and I got into it in a roundabout way. I was a victim of a crime when I was a kid, and then I was a victim of the criminal justice system, and it made me realize how vulnerable we were. Yeah. And that was back in the 60s, so in 1988, I said, you know what, it's time to do what I really love to do, and I started this business on a whim and a prayer, and 10 years later, I was doing television shows, and Emmy-nominated, Emmy winner, and I was like, wow, it obviously has worked out well. And I continue to do it. I mean, and I do it because I've spent a lot of time while I'm in the business interviewing victims. Yeah. And every victim that I've ever dealt with, whether it's at home, on vacation, traveling, grocery store, every victim that I've dealt with shares one thing in common. Each and every one of them said, Dan, I didn't think it would happen to me. Yeah. Because they didn't think it would happen to them. They weren't prepared for it. Yeah. And it really got me into looking at the whole criminal community. And I've really come to understand that crime is never random. And crime is never senseless. Now, it's never random because the criminal, when he goes out to commit a crime, that criminal knows where they're going to go, how they're going to get there, what they're going to take, how they're going to get away, what they're going to do with what they take. But the most important part of the equation we fail to think about is they know what they're willing to do to you to get what they need. And they don't care that you might be somebody's husband, father, wife, daughter, new bride. Right. Because the chances of them getting caught are so slim. Right. You know, they got an 80% chance of committing a crime and never getting caught. Really? So yeah, so the numbers work in their favor. So over the years, I've come to realize self-defense is kind of like driving a car. You got in your car today to drive over the studio, put your seatbelt on, put your key in the ignition. You weren't driving down the street going, oh my God, they're going to kill me. Should have, because people in Charlotte drive crazy. But you got in your car expecting other people to fail to do what they did. Yeah. And as you approach an intersection, inadvertently you look both ways, as you approach a traffic light, and if a guy in front of you all of a sudden slams on his brakes, his brake light sends a signal to you, Houston, we got a problem. You recognize there's a problem. Right. Now, next thing you do is respond. Maybe you respond by stepping on the brakes, maybe you respond by stepping on the gas, but those are all things that you determine at that point. Right. Okay? If you avoid an accident, you've resolved the conflict. Self-defense is the same way. You know, you're out in public and somebody approaches you, they've approached you because to them, you're available, you're accessible, you're vulnerable, you have something of value, and they have the element of surprise. Right. So we talk about travel, okay? We're talking about leaving our home. Right. We're talking about going into a new community, a community that we're not necessarily aware of. The first thing I tell anybody, whether they're traveling, whether they're driving in a car, or going on a train, or flying in a plane, every suitcase should have a copy of your driver's license, right, and a copy of your passport. Yep. Have you ever gone past an automobile accident on the highway and there's suitcases strewn all over the road? Mm-hmm. Well, those get collected and they ended up someplace, and if people haven't got some physical connection to the inside of them, you've got a problem. Right. Same thing when you fly. You know, if you fly and your suitcase ends up someplace else, proof that it's your suitcase is, you know, the fact. And it's little things like that that make a difference, you know, and we've become a different country because of social media, because of cell phones. Right. Okay? Yep. And the problem with cell phones is they're linked to such things as Facebook and Twitter, which are public domains that everybody, including the criminals, have access to.
Right.
And I tell my students when they go on vacation, take all the pictures you want, but don't share those until you come home.
Right.
Because if you're over in Barbados and you got a picture of you on the beach and it comes through on some criminal's cell phone, he says, wait a minute, here's a home where these people aren't around. And it makes you an easy target.
Right.
So let's talk about preparing your home. You're going to go on vacation. Everybody thinks, well, I'll stop the mail and I'll stop the newspaper. Wrong thing to do. I would suggest you continue to have the mail delivered if you've got a reliable neighbor who will come over every day, pick it up and bring it into your house.
Right.
Pick up your newspaper, bring it into your house. Now, when you bring it into your house, they want to set it in a place where it's not visible through a window. Because if I'm going through a neighborhood looking for houses to break in and I look in your window and there's piles of unopened mail on the kitchen table, it says to me, you've been gone for a while and you're not home.
Right.
So what we really need to do is think like a criminal.
Right.
Not act like a criminal, but look, and as I tell people, look at your life through the eyes of a criminal in everything you do.
You know, years ago I saw this thing of a criminal that robbed a lot of houses, a cat burglar, whatever you call it, and he had the top 10 things that people don't realize from the eyes of a cat burglar. And one of the things it never crossed my mind was people put these security signs in front of the house.
Right.
He said cat burglars don't go in the front of the house.
Right.
He says put it in the back of the house. You can stick one out in the front if you want, but put it in the back of the house because that's where we're coming in from.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Well, and see, that's just it. And the reason people don't, because they don't think it's going to ever happen to them.
Right. Exactly.
Every victim I've ever dealt with said, Dan, I didn't think. If you remember Elizabeth Smart years ago, a little girl who was kidnapped from her home, I worked with Ed Smart.
Wow.
Ed Smart said to me, Dan, I didn't think my children needed to know how to protect themselves living in a $2.5 million mansion with a full security system in a gated community with 24-hour live security. And he said until 3:18 in the morning when my little 9-year-old girl came in and said, Daddy, get up, as Elizabeth's gone. And I was like, and he said, I got up, went downstairs to the TV room where she normally fell asleep. She wasn't there. Said that's when my wife grabbed my arm, pointed down the hall to the window that was broken and the screen that was slit. Said my wife began to scream, and he said she didn't stop for the next 19 hours. Then he went on and talked about the 9 months of hell the family went through. And you see, I've been in this business long enough to realize that criminal goes out and commits a crime, you've got a victim, right? How that affects the victim, we'll never understand. That victim there's a loss of security, there's a loss of comfort, there's a loss of freedom, and it can affect relationships, can affect job, it can affect health. That's why I've always been such a proponent of taking a proactive approach to protecting yourself. I mean, I have not left my home since 1979 without carrying a gun, okay? And I don't carry a gun to shoot people. I carry a gun as a device to help me get away from evil people. You know, if I find myself in a situation, have to use the gun normally says to the bad guy, you picked the wrong person, they leave, at which point in time I win. I had an elderly woman spring of this year come take my concealed weapons class. She had been shopping over at South Park, and she had come out of one of the major retailers on a Monday morning about 10:30 in the morning, and I knew she had an older car because when she walked up to her car, she had to put the key in the lock.
Right.
She put the key in the lock. She had her bag in one hand, had her purse over her shoulder, put the key in the lock. Said 2 guys jumped up from behind her car and came running at her. And I said, what'd you do? Said, I dropped my shopping bag, reached in my purse, took out my .38 caliber pistol and pointed at them. I said, which point in time? They slammed on their brakes, turned around, took off running. I said, really? I said, how long have you carried that gun? She said, 20 years.
Wow.
So it's the first time I ever had to use it.
Right.
Called the police. Police came and congratulated her on being prepared and told her, go take a concealed carry course to make it legal. They said that's happening a lot over there. People are, having their cars stolen, getting carjacked. And this was at 10:30 in the morning on a bright, sunny day, not in the parking deck underneath, but right out and open.
Wow. That's scary.
Well, it is scary. But you see, these criminals don't care. That probably what happened is one of the guys went into the store, walked around and looked for an easy target.
Yeah.
Saw this elderly woman shopping and thought, okay. Then probably contacted his buddy outside and said, here's our next victim.
Yeah.
Went outside and waited for her, and when they approached her, they met with something that they didn't expect to meet.
Right.
And that's my belief. I would rather have a tool for self-defense and not need it than need something and not have it.
Right.
And I look at the issue of travel. Okay, a lot of people travel with firearms, and I'm a big advocate of that. And it's actually legal to travel on an airplane with a gun. There's a couple of things you need to do. I would go on the website, for instance, if I was going to fly on U.S. Air, I'd go on the website and I would download this document. It tells me what U.S. airline requires me to do when I travel.
Okay.
So now I go to the airport because you have to declare the fact that you have a firearm and you're standing in line waiting to go through security. Now, the person working behind the counter might not be familiar with their law. And they may say, oh no, you can't carry a firearm. At that point in time, you're really kind of out of luck because they have the authority whether they let you on the plane or not. The person that's dropped you off is gone. You're now stuck in an airport with a gun.
Right.
You can't go forward. You know. But if you copy this and take it with you, and then you can say, let's talk to a supervisor, because it says right here, no weapons in carry-on, but checking weapons.
Right.
And then you say, it says I did this, 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 and this is a device. This small container here is a airline approved box that you would put your firearm in, okay?
Okay.
And then you would put this in your suitcase and your firearm would be in here, but it can't be loaded.
Okay.
You cannot have ammunition in here. So
Separate
now
area.
you show this to the person behind the counter, you lock it up, take your key out, they put it in your suitcase, lock your suitcase up, send your suitcase on. Now this document will be in with this. That way if anybody along the way handling it discovers that there's a firearm and isn't sure of the laws,
They can
here's
check.
the airline's copy of the laws.
Now, do all states in the United States allow that if you're
No,
landing?
no.
Depends on the
That's
state.
why I brought this other document. This
Okay.
other document I have is firearms laws. This happens to be the firearms laws of North Carolina. Okay. If you are going to travel with a firearm in your vehicle, in your plane, in your Winnebago, in your motorcycle, whatever, you need to understand the laws of every state that you go through. All right. North Carolina has a concealed carry permit that allows you to travel through 40 states with a concealed weapon in your vehicle. But when I go from North Carolina to South Carolina,
Right.
I'm governed by the laws of South Carolina. Recently, there was a woman in Philadelphia. She was a 24-year-old woman, had 2 young children, and she drove to New Jersey. And when she was driving through New Jersey, she got stopped by a police officer. She had a broken taillight. When she pulled over, before she opened her glove box, she said to the police officer, I have a firearm in my glove box. Police officer said, I appreciate the information. I'll need to see it. So she gives him the key. He opens the glove box, takes the gun out, unloads it, and arrests her. She had hollow point ammunition in her gun, which was illegal in New Jersey.
legal in other states, but not
legal in other
legal
states,
in New Jersey.
but not legal in New Jersey. And now she's facing 11 and a half years in jail.
Oh my gosh. Really?
Which, I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
You know, so something as simple as a magazine. Now, this is unloaded, but if it was a 15-round magazine and I had it in my vehicle driving through New Jersey and got stopped, I'd be arrested.
Right.
The one thing we don't understand about being arrested, ignorance of the law, as in G officer, I didn't know that was the law, is not an excuse.
No.
That's an admission of guilt. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, it can affect, you know, it can affect your right. In this woman's case, not only did she get arrested, she no longer can own a gun.
Wow.
She cannot have a gun in her house.
And it's a felony, right? Would
And
that
it's a
be
felony, yeah. And so she went from being a law-abiding citizen who made, I mean, she probably shouldn't even told the police officer. But rather than opening a glove compartment,
She was trying to do the right thing.
She
and
was
it
trying to do
backfired
the
on her.
right thing, and the right thing cost her tremendous.
You know, you point that out about different states, and we're on the border of North and South Carolina, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the glove compartment is an issue between the two states, right?
Right.
One-
In North Carolina, you can't have a gun in the glove compartment unless you have a concealed carry permit. You can have it out on the seat.
Right.
In South Carolina, you cannot have the gun out on the seat. You can have it in a glove compartment without a concealed carry permit. So you're taking your family down to Carowinds.
Right.
You're in North Carolina, South Carolina, and all of a sudden the blue lights go on behind you. Where's your gun? Officer, I didn't understand, is not an excuse.
Right.
And unfortunately, the media is obviously blaming this. They're saying firearms are the reason we have a problem in society. I have never met a gun that committed a crime.
Right.
I've met a lot of people who've committed crimes. Some using guns, some using baseball bats, some using firearms. But we have allowed the media to feed us with this nonsense that weapons are bad. I can tell you the one thing. If Effie, who is producing the show, okay, were in a situation getting out of her car and somebody came up and approached her. Effie's a senior citizen.
Right.
Beautiful lady.
Yes.
Gets out of her car and somebody approached her and she has a firearm, she is now equal to or greater than the criminal.
But on that note, and just let me ask the question.
Yeah.
Because some people say, absolutely right, there's no question about that. But would every person who owns a gun and takes training, would they be able, whether it's Effie or Mrs. Jones, be able to pull that trigger in self-defense if somebody approached them?
That's a good question that I don't think you can answer.
Yeah.
Now, I can tell you this, if you have a young mother with children and somebody gets between her and the children, that woman will rip your skin off before she uses her gun.
Yep.
But the problem is we have gotten to the point where, I mean, we think, well, I couldn't shoot somebody. Listen, I don't want to shoot somebody,
Right.
but I don't want my sisters, I don't want my daughter and my granddaughter and my wife to get a call saying, I'm sorry, Dan didn't make it. He wasn't properly prepared. Because you know what? None of us is going to get off this earth alive. That's a fact.
Right.
When we die is really determined by the good Lord.
Right.
I don't want it to be at the hand of some 17-year-old crackhead and you look at the insanity of gun-free zones. One thing that I tell people when they travel is you need to be very wary of entering into gun-free zones. And now we've got to take that one step farther and understand if you're traveling through a sanctuary city. A sanctuary city is a city in which the city fathers don't necessarily support the federal laws, as we saw
San Francisco.
here recently, and that kid went into a church against the law, went into a church, befriended those people. When that young kid went into that church and sat down in that Bible study group, he was trying to gain their confidence. He was trying to gain their comfort. I call that emotionally disarming them. They got to the point where they were trusting him. So when He decided it was time to get evil, got up, took a gun out, and started shooting, and stopped and had to reload. None of those people had the process of mind to say, time to attack, time to knock them down. And he ended up slaughtering all those people. Now, I have, for the years I've been in business, I can tell you the number of ministers and priests that have come through and taken my concealed weapons class. You know, some of these churches on Sundays get thousands and tens and thousands of dollars in money that's don't, you know. Then they've got these little 80-year-old white-haired women in the back counting it. And listen, it's you know, ripe for the taking. Mm-hmm. So I think what's happening is Americans are finally wising up and getting smart about, you know, about protecting themselves. Now, we talk about travel. Whether you're traveling in-state or out-of-state, we carry a wallet. A wallet, I mean, this is my life right here.
Right.
Okay? If I lose it, if it's stolen, I'm out of luck. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I'm not out of luck. Of course, before I went on the trip, I took a copy. I took all of the stuff in my wallet, put it on a copier, copied the front of it and the back of it.
That's a good idea.
Well, that way, if my wallet's gone, I don't have to say, oh my God, what am I going to do with all of my credit cards? I look at my American Express. On the back of it's the phone number. On the front of it's the card number.
Right.
And the expiration date. So now I can do a little bit of work and cut my losses. But you see, again, most people don't think
right.
it's ever going to happen. I mean, come on. How many times have you misplaced your wallet?
Yeah.
You know, let alone had it stolen or whatever. And so I look at the whole issue of self-defense and travel. I mean, if I'm going to go out of town, okay, I have some trusted friends that have keys to my house. I'll ask them to come over and spend some time. Mm-hmm. I used to have an elderly gentleman who was a good friend of mine. Ed used to love to come to my house when I go on vacation. I'd fill up the refrigerator with all sorts of good food, and he'd come in and he'd spend 4 or 5 or 10, however long I was there. And what that said to the people looking at my house, that house is occupied.
Right.
You know,
lights are going on and off.
Yeah, I mean, and if you can't do that, then what you should do is get a neighbor who would be willing to park their car in your driveway, maybe right. on Mondays and Tuesdays. And then what you want to do is make sure that somebody picks up your mail. And in other words, don't shut off your mail.
Right.
Don't shut off your newspaper. Because the guy who's monitoring your house, if he sees the mailman skip your house every day, it's
right.
a message.
Yeah.
He sees the newspaper man skip your house every day, it's a message.
You know, if I could, I want to come back to the international travel.
Yeah.
I used to, in a prior life, travel internationally for a living for about 15 years.
Right.
And a guy told me at the embassy one time when I was coming into the country, I just happened to become friends with him. He said, coming back to your point, always make a photocopy of the front inside information of your passport.
Right.
And what I didn't know is you could contact the embassy and
right.
register to the country that you're in. Is that true?
And they'll know that you're there.
They'll know that you're there,
right.
the dates that you're there.
Which also, I mean, because of we're becoming a country of older people, we take more medicine.
Yeah.
So traveling with prescriptions can be an issue. It could be a legal issue.
Yeah.
You know, you're coming through London and you've got bottles of pills in your and maybe the bottles are not the original bottles or not the prescription bottles. You're not going to get through customs. They're going to take your pills away and they may put you away. So you really have to, I would also make sure that you carry a copy of your prescription, the paper prescription, in with your passport and your license. And people say, oh my God, that's a lot of work. No, it's not a lot of work when all of a sudden it can save you hours.
Right.
And hours of time. It's the same thing when I tell people about traveling. I've got a guy who's driving through 25 states for vacation this summer. I told him, make a copy of all of the state laws you're traveling through.
Yeah.
And now this is from the Attorney General. Attorney General is the top cop in the state. Mm-hmm. So if the Attorney General of North Carolina tells Dan that he can do X, Y, and Z, I can do X, Y, and Z, no questions about it.
Right.
So I said, the reason you'd want to have these with you, let's assume you're coming back from the beach and you go through a little small southern town on a Sunday night.
Right.
And you get stopped by the police and you're transporting a firearm and the police officer said you can't do that. At that point in time, it's your word against his, or your word and the law from his bosses against his, which can eliminate you getting arrested, you getting detained. And again, you only need to do these maybe once a year.
Yeah.
Because the laws don't change that often.
Yeah, yeah.
But it becomes, truly what happens is self-defense becomes a way of life, okay, in everything you do. When I left to come over here this morning, okay, I turned a radio on at one end of my house on WBT 1110 AM News Talk Radio. So if anybody was outside of my house thinking about breaking in, they're going to hear that. Well, who listens to that nonsense? Men.
Yeah.
The other end of my house, I put on a sports TV show. Who listens to that stuff? Men. So if somebody is casing my house, wondering whether they should break in, first of all, that noise is going to indicate maybe somebody's home.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Maybe I won't go in his house. I'll try that house over there. They go in and break into my neighbor's house. My neighbor hasn't done that. That's not my problem. Did it cost me anything? No.
No. Yeah.
Didn't cost me a thing. What it did was allow me to be more comfortable.
When we first moved in our house 10 years ago, 3 minivans in the span of 4 houses were broken into in and outside the garage. And they determined it was because the criminal thought wives would leave their purses in the minivans. And they
Sure.
were right. 2 of the 4 vans had their purses
yeah.
in there. So
Yeah. Well, as you can see, I am all about protecting. And I think you need to carry the right tools.
Right.
And I think you have to have the right mindset.
Yes.
And I think you have to be able to say, okay, I've got a 3 to 5 second rule to recognize the problem for what it is, respond with what I've done, resolve the conflict, then I get to live another day.
Yes. Excellent. I think Dan, that was an excellent summary of what's needed. And for our viewers out there, if anybody's interested, certainly look into Stark's Training Institute or other type institutes like that do self-defense. I'm going to start off by saying I would like to thank everybody for tuning into the show tonight. Dan, thank you for being our guest.
Thank you.
And
Always
we
a
hope
pleasure.
that you tune in again for another episode of Aging with Attitude. Thank you. Good night.